I moved to London in 2011. The reason for my move to London is very simple, but holds a legend so shocking that I'm not even sure of its truth, only its impact. Up until 3 years ago, I lived in the town of Wickford, Essex. For those of you who are not well versed in the geography of southeast England, Wickford is, by definition, a shithole. Made up of a high street with nothing bigger than a small W.H. Smith's, a cooperative, and a 99p store. It is a boring and scuzzy place, an urban cesspit. I didn't leave because of these factors. Running through Wickford is the River Crouch. Whilst parts of the Crouch in Wickford are highly nice looking, the town centre's section of the Crouch is banked by concrete, a provision put into place following 2 floods back in the late 1950s. The result of this is a complex and very ugly tunnel system interlocking with the sewers. Now that I've provided sufficient context for the perhaps true myth, I will begin. In 1979, a pupil at a local secondary school, the name of which I genuinely don't know, adding to the idea that this legend is make-believe, was feared. His name was Jack Caden, and whilst a popular womanizer, his mean streak bordered on sadism. He relished in putting his other peers in pain, so much so that he made your average playground bully seem generous. Caden's good looks were unmatched, even though his grin was apparently wolf-like and deeply unsettling. On a fateful stormy night in the middle of winter 1979, a group of the more commonly targeted of Caden's antics felt that they had finally taken enough grief from him. They attacked him as he strolled down London Road. The group of 6 boys and 2 girls bagged him. They lunged the powerless Caden to underneath the London Road Bridge, and to the partially concealed concrete Crouch Bank. I'm not totally sure what those 8 people precisely did to Caden, but I do know that his face was mutilated to the point that he was unrecognizable. They then left him for dead. His body, however, was never found, and the police ceased their search for him 3 years later. In 1986, one of the girls was found naked at the same place that Caden had been mutilated. Her neck had been snapped, and her entrails were littered on the concrete of the bank. Pinned to her forehead was a note. Cold. The police struggled to find a motive. The unmarried girl had just given birth to a daughter, but the confrontational father, who was not in a relationship with the girl anymore, had an alibi. Unable to find a convincing perpetrator, the case went unsolved. 6 months later, a young sewage maintenance officer was discovered by a co-worker. There were clear signs of a struggle. He had been grabbed from behind and drowned in the water. Again, he was one of those who had attacked Caden. For a time, just prior to my move to London, I attempted to research these murders. Unfortunately, the records for Wickford's local newspaper, the Weekly Echo, only existed from 1968 to 1974, and then from 1995 onwards. The atmosphere that the supposed murders left was toxic, and that was evidence enough for me wanting to leave. I did find one article that worked as kind of evidence. From June 1999 was the report of a 12-year-old girl's disappearance near the River Crouch. The author mentioned in passing that the girl's mother had died in 1986 under similar circumstances to the girl's disappearance. I still wonder today if this means that Caden was also after the children of his original victims. A further 4 of the boys that had played a part in the attack of Caden were gruesomely murdered in the late 1980s. Because I am unsure of these 4 men's names, I will refer to them as B1, B2, B3 and B4. B1's decapitated body was left on the road, and his head left just under a sewer grate. B2 was stabbed to death, with the word cold carved into his forehead. B3 and B4 were found sewn together and had clearly starved to death, stuck in the middle of a sewage pipe, clogging the waste. The girl that had not been killed back in '86 was abducted in March 1991, aged around 27. She was childless, just as all the other victims had been, bar the first girl. This girl was never murdered. Instead, she was sighted at the high street 3 months after she was taken, with a blank expression. She jumped in front of a car. There was now only one of Jack Caden's attackers alive. This boy, now a man, became a father in April 1992. I am his son. Allow me to clarify a few details here. I am now 22 years old. I was 19 when I left Wickford. The fact that the first girl's daughter was killed by Caden haunts me to the core. After all, my dad himself was killed and skinned by Jack Caden in 1994. My mother hesitantly told me the story in 2008, after which I went on my research spree. As I asked around and filled in the holes in the story, I likewise talked to people who claimed that my father had died in a car accident or drowned. I have absolutely no idea why these people would want to actively protect Caden. Maybe they were in denial. One night in 2010, I simply sat down and thought about incidents in my life that I had no explanation for. The more that I looked back through my memories, the more that I believed the legend of Jack Caden was true. I noted that when I started out the Bromford Senior School in the Grange area of Wickford, my mother had specifically ordered me to take a longer route than the more convenient London roadway. Obviously, she was worried for my safety that close to Caden's lair. I remembered an afternoon in the summer holidays when I was around 8 years old. An ugly bald man that I had assumed to be wearing a very realistic Halloween mask walked up to me as I rode my bike up and down the street. He asked me if I wanted to meet my dad. I told the man my father was dead, to which he pulled a very sinister expression, strangely visible through the mask, I had thought, and remarked, "I know." I was totally creeped out and biked home faster than ever before. So why did I abruptly drop everything and make a move in 2011? My mother died of cancer in late 2010. I inherited her house. This heightened my sense of fear day to day. Every time I heard the wind, I jumped. Every time I saw my reflection, my heart skipped a beat. In November 2011, more than 3 decades after Caden's mutilation, I failed to sleep on a stormy night. I kept hearing noises around the house, but whenever I went to investigate, I found no intruder. I was driven so sick by this that I packed up a small bag and caught the train to London Liverpool Street Station to stay with my mother's family there. They had previously offered to host me routinely since my mother's death. I have never gone back to Wickford. Instead, I asked my friends to collect my possessions into a moving van, and I instructed real estate agents to put my house on the market. Like I said before, the reason for my move to London is simple, but holds a very shocking legend. The reason that I moved to London is that the police called me on my first afternoon at my aunt and uncle's house. They informed me that there had been a break-in at my Wickford residence, but nothing had been taken. Instead, one word had been scrawled on the walls all over the house: cold.